that women don't actually like nice guys? Because then why do we hate men?
Being nice is, what the f does that do for me?
So I stumbled across this channel about a year ago called Just Pearly Things, and she was doing reaction videos to Kevin Samuels, Fresh and Fit, and other people in the Red Pill community. And now she's grown in popularity, and I see she's doing more of a podcast style setup as well. And I stumbled across one that was pretty interesting for me because I watch this stuff. I'm very diverse in my YouTube videos that I watch, but this particular one was good because one of the guests she had was a psychology major. Now, I'm big on when I see any type of podcast have someone in the psychological fields, whether it be a high-level expert or just someone who went to school for it or took some classes, because I'm always analyzing what they're talking about, not in a good or bad way. But this particular guest, she talked a lot about her background in the psychology field. So I said this would be a perfect episode for the Mental Breakdown to talk about these concepts and what we can learn from Just Pearly Things on psychology. So I'm going to go over some clips that I picked out, and I'll talk about some of the concepts, break them down, and see what's right, what could have been explained better maybe. But either way, make sure you check out her channel, and let's get into it.
Oh, well, we had a conversation about the nice guy complex. Okay. But, you know, being nice is important, but it's the bare minimum. It's literally like breathing. It's important, but it's the bare minimum.
I think that women don't actually like nice guys, because then why do we hate men?
Being nice is, what the does that do for me? If you're nice, I'm like,
no,
cool.
I'm saying like you always hear women say men are trash. If they weren't sleeping with the trash men, why would they say that?
That is true. Men are trash.
So I don't, but like you think that why? Because you've probably slept with some men that are trash, that aren't nice. That's what I'm saying. I don't think women actually like nice guys.
Now here she was talking about nice guys, and it's pretty interesting. She made a comment about nice guys not being enough, or it's just a bare minimal. And then Pearl asks, why don't people go for the nice guys? Women typically look over them and they usually go for the bad boys. Then it brings up this stigma that all men are trash, right? Well, in psychology, you can talk about different personality traits such as agreeableness. Now, research has shown that people who score high on agreeableness can predict longer relationship satisfaction. Now, when it comes to men who are high on agreeableness, it's typically not seen as attractive because what agreeableness entails is usually someone who's more compromising. They're looked at almost as pushovers sometimes because they go with the flow, usually with the group. They're not necessarily leaders. They're not going to be truculent, belligerent, and demand things. Now, you can see how that could be good for a relationship because you have to be compromising. You can't always have your way. So this is why people who score high on it usually do better in relationships, especially with men. People want to be pleased even in a romantic way or sexually. It shows that they're actually better in that too because they're going to be more concerned of their partner's needs. Now, with that being said, on the grander scheme of things in real application, since I am in the applied psychology field, how does it make sense in the real world? Now, typically, a guy who has those traits of agreeableness is going to be looked at as weaker because most girls want the guy who's going to take charge, speak up. And if you look from an evolutionary standpoint, this is what it took for us to survive. You had to be aggressive. You had to take charge and lead, whether it been getting food for the tribe or protect from other enemies that in their surrounding areas. So this was needed for us to be able to exist for hundreds of thousands of years. So it makes sense why girls could go for that. But depending how high they are on other personality traits that are detrimental to a satisfactory relationship, such as neuroticism, this is when people are worrisome, they have trouble with anxiety, they stress, also open to experience and even novelty seeking, because those traits relate to being on the next new thing, being on the scene, doing things that are going to put them in the forefront. And this is not very conducive to a good relationship because someone who gets tired quickly is probably going to want to step out on the partner or do things that might be detrimental to the relationship. It's not necessarily saying girls don't like nice guys or even nice guys are rare. It's just that they're not going to fulfill some of the evolutionary psychological needs that might be internally looked for. But in the grand scheme of things, agreeableness is needed to some degree.
Your self-worth, what does that mean? I don't get that.
So if I believe, do you know what? I'm a catch.
Yeah.
I believe that I bring a lot
it's like
to the
confidence?
Table. Yeah.
Okay.
Self-assuredness. And recently I'm like, I'm not curing cancer. I'm not going to the moon. Mm-hmm. If anything, it's that middle ground between.
It's like being okay with being average. Like most people are average.
I tell people, I'm like, oh, I'm average. And then like guys will be like, but you're not. And it's like, well, I'm not curing cancer. I'm not going to the moon.
Yeah.
However, like it's that middle ground between being self-assured and self-confident, but being humble.
But when did average become a bad thing?
Yeah.
Most people are average.
So one of the quotes I love to I learn is like, we can all believe that we or someone we're dating is 1 in a million.
Yeah.
But then you've got to be like, we're 1 of a million.
Yeah.
Of a million.
So I always say there's a war on average. I don't get why average is such a bad thing. They said it. And I think it's because when they hear the word average, they get emotionally charged as not good. Average doesn't mean that. It's a statistical measure. It means if I take a bunch of data points, I'm most likely to find a specific amount. That's all it really means. Like if I said the average salary in America is $40,000, that means if I took a random 100 people and asked them what their salary was, about half of them would say around $40,000. Now, it could be plus or minus. This is deviation or variance, but I'm not going to get too deep into the statistical side of things. But people turn this around as a bad thing. I'm 6'1", so I'm above average height. I'm 140 IQ. I'm above average intelligence, but this doesn't mean I'm better or worse than anyone. Like if I use myself, I'm a below average singer. I'm a below average dancer. That's not something I'm good at. It doesn't make me a worse person. There's going to be people that do better and above average scoring on certain tasks. There's going to be people do lower. The name of the game is knowing where you fit in. You can use this to approach certain tasks. Now, why does this even happen in the first place? Why have we gotten to the point where we hear something like average at best? Shouts out to the late great Kevin Samuels. Has that become an issue is because there's a cognitive bias called the illusory superiority complex. Now, what happens here is we have an over-esteemed feeling about our own confidence and abilities. Now, this is not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It could be both depending on how much you use it. For example, they've polled drivers on how well they think they are of their driving abilities compared to others. And about 80% of people said they had above average driving skills. Now, this is statistically impossible because only 50% can be above average. But you see, this feeling of that I'm better is important because if you don't have that kind of confidence, you don't attempt things. So on the good end of the spectrum, when you think you're above average or have that perception, you attempt more tasks that can benefit you. If we go back to ancient times, our ancestors had to think that they can take down these huge mammoths or these other large animals that are much bigger and stronger than they are. But if they didn't do that, they wouldn't have survived and we wouldn't have gotten to this point. Now, if you use that same context in modern times, we know for a fact 95% of businesses fail, usually in the first 3 to 5 years. Now, if you say, oh, what's the point of trying? Then nobody would start a business and we wouldn't have any companies to give us food, supplies, shelter, whatever it is. Someone has to have that belief in themselves, say, hey, I know the eyes and I'm the one that can do it. Granted, they may still fail, but you have to try and take the risk. Now, on the bad side of that spectrum, if too many people attempt things that are out of their reach, then they may not meet deadlines. They might fall behind on their work schedules, let family members down because they overestimated their abilities. There's another bias I'll talk about. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it kind of goes hand in hand. And basically what happened is two psychologists, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, they found that people overestimate their abilities compared to others when it comes to their lack of knowledge or level of performance. If someone is the bottom tier performer, they're going to think they're better, and someone's a high tier performer, they're going to think they're worse. So the bottom tier performer thinks they're better because they don't have the skill set to recognize what it takes to be a high performer. They just assume, hey, if I overcame this and did it, I must be great. And on the other side of the spectrum, people who are above average or high level performers, they think, well, if I was able to do it, I know it takes a lot of work and dedication, then if anyone else can do it, if they just try and work hard. So they're more humble about it. So these errors in judgment can go either way. So this is another reason why people misjudge their abilities, because if you can't recognize how well you perform, or you're ignorant to how well you need to perform to do something, you can't really assess it, and you're going to predict that you're much better than you really are.
So you've got two types of processing. You've got top down or bottom up. Top down processing are people who are like, I want a relationship, ergo I'm looking for someone who can fill that criteria. So when they go on dates, when they swipe, they're like, I'm literally thinking about, are you going to be relationship material? Or there's people like me, I'm bottom up, where I'm like, I'd rather just meet someone and be like, where is this going to go? Let's live in the now. Let's take it date by date, time by time.
So I think she explained this pretty well, top down and bottom up processing. So she explained it with the dating reference. So I'll use some other references. So in day-to-day life, we're presented with a lot of information. We have to do tasks, whether it's at a job, school, relationships, family, whatever. We have to carry these tasks out. So it's an ever-changing switch of top-down and bottom-up processing. Now, if you use an example of someone who's driving, now top-down would be the specific route they want to take. Where's their destination? Where are they trying to go? If I say I need to go to the store to buy groceries, I have to start here and process what's the route, what's the weather or traffic looking like. I go the route that I know, or if I need to go somewhere different I usually don't go, I look up the route. So this takes more intent in the context. Now, with bottom up, if that same example, it would be, okay, now I'm driving, going on the route that I looked up and know now, but a car cuts me off and I have to take in the external stimuli of what's happening in my environment and adapt. And you see why this is ever changing, because in life, there's always plans or things we're trying to do on purpose and with intent, but there's going to be things that's happening in the moment. So let's say, for example, if I put on the screen the words S and P. Now, if you just see those two words and I say fill in the blank of what you think it is, you might say soap, right? That could work. S and P starts with S, ends with a P. Now, if I did the same thing and put the letters S and P again, and I said we use this to get clean, now your brain goes to soap. Your brain's always toggling between real-time information using something called working memory, but also using long-term memory to recall what's already been done and put it into real-time context, because we take in a lot of information every day. So we can't utilize it all in real time. So we have to toggle between the two. And with this type of processing, top down and bottom up, we're able to assess the situation and make the best choices.
Then that
I think that's really reductionist. So if you knew me, I was suicidal. I tried to kill myself a couple of times.
Now, I clipped this particular one, not necessarily to explain something. Well, I guess I'll still end up explaining something. But I had to point out, I didn't really like how it was portrayed of mental illness, because granted, I'm not saying she's not struggling with any mental illness. That's not what I'm saying. But it just seemed, it was said very flippantly and not that serious. It's not to say you have to cry yourself to sleep, but it's a very deep topic. A lot of people deal with it. 1 in 4 people deal with different types of mental illness, such as anxiety and depression. So it's not rare. So the stigma, I feel, is going down, but I think how we talk about it is important. I always say mental health issues should be talked about. They should be used common, but not commonly. So what that means is don't popularize it or glamorize it. Yes, people need to talk about it. People need to know, but it shouldn't be something like a badge of honor. And I think I see that a lot. And I'm not accusing this lady of doing it, but I see it a lot in my social media, even my day-to-day life, because I was originally going to be a clinical psychologist before I got more into the practical and applied side of psychology. So I had to take classes on psychopathology, learning all the different disorders in DSM-5, and it takes a lot of criteria. So typically there's usually 6 to 9 different criteria you need to meet. It's not that you just have a sad day or you don't want to be around people. These are things that happen every day. I always say everyone deals with mental health, but not everyone deals with mental illness. So when it becomes illness or a disorder, we're talking about intensity, frequency, and severity. If it's subclinical, that means it's occurring in a state that you're not reaching enough of the points on the diagnosis. Also, you're not getting them for a prolonged period of time. It has to be on an onset that affects your day-to-day living for weeks, months, even longer. So these are things to take into consideration. The severity and intensity is going to play a big factor when it becomes a diagnosis. So we got to take that into consideration when we talk about these things, because everyone, like I said, deals with mental health issues, but not everyone deals with mental illness. So that's all I got to say. Just make sure you take it serious.
we're attracted to shitty traits and we can't really help it. Like
Freud would have a field day.
No, like we like assholes. We do. I mean, and I understand like the science of why it's like the dark triad traits, like the same trait. Yeah.
Can you define the dark triad? Because I only discovered this recently.
Oh God, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it's like a guy that's aggressive, right?
Yeah.
Like why do women stay with the men that like beat them? Because the same men that like are aggressive and like beat them can also beat up someone else. So it's the same trait, right? A guy that's controlling, right? He also can control the environment. Yeah. So it's I don't remember all of them, but it's like it's like the same traits that make a guy like completely like an awful like partner also make him a really good one. Does that make sense?
So the dark triad. So I've had some experience knowing about this. It's pretty interesting. And when I saw her talking about it, I respect her for saying, I don't fully know. So always saying your scope of practice is something I'm big on too. And it doesn't mean you can't talk about things. Just know how far you can talk about things. Even I have my limitations, right? So with the dark triad, there's 3 parts. That's the name triad. There's Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and narcissism. Now, all these are subclinical. Like I mentioned on the previous clip, this means it's not presenting all the effects of being a disorder, because once it's to that point, it's actually clinical and this is way more severe. So when people present some traits of narcissism or some traits of psychopathy, this is what we're talking about. So what are each one? So psychopathy is more so having less empathy for the world. Your actions are dictated more so by your own self-interest. And they kind of overlap in some senses, but they also differ. With narcissism, this is a greater sense of self, like a God complex, thinking that you're bigger, more grandiose than you are. Also is dealing with egocentrism. It also deals with how you may use people to achieve your goals. Like people talk about gaslighting. So that's when you put someone down by reinforcing thoughts in their head that may not be there to uplift what you're trying to accomplish. And they start questioning if it's really happening. Like if you say, oh, I'm sorry you felt that way, you're dismissing the fact that they did feel a way so you can feel better about yourself because you could do no wrong, right? So that's a little bit about narcissism. And Machiavellianism, this is one of my favorite. Think about something like politicians. Machiavellianism, can see the name, comes from the philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli, and he's written numerous books talking about topics of like deception, right? So when you see someone who scores high on Machiavellianism, they're good at deceiving, playing people against each other, plotting. That's why I likened it to being a politician. So these traits, the dark triad, they make up the traits that she mentioned. Why do they seem preferable to a dating partner with women? Now, I don't necessarily think they're preferable to the extent of they want someone who's completely cold, standoffish, only cares about themselves, because obviously that's not beneficial to a relationship. But going back to what I mentioned earlier on the first clip, nice guys, right? These guys who have these traits to even some extent, even a little bit, is not necessarily a bad thing, because you do have to play the world to your advantage to some cases. Like humans are very social creatures. We evolved to live in societies. And once upon a time, we would communicate with grunts and noises and became language. And once language came about, more body language came. See, I'm moving my hands and stuff. And then these things played a role in how we interpret things. And then you talk about things like lying or bending the truth or omitting information. This all leads to it. So these traits have a role in society, not necessarily for good or bad, but to accomplish an outcome. Because at the end of the day, we need to keep going from a biological standpoint and now from a societal standpoint. So guys who present these traits, it's not saying that they need to have the high level of them, but having some of them could be beneficial, because if a woman wants a leader, an aggressive man that takes charge, they're going to have a certain level of the dark triad traits. But obviously, like I say, it's subclinical. We're not talking about Ted Bundy, right? That's crazy to say his name. But remember, even though he was a convicted murderer, there's women still wanting him. And also say someone like a fictional character, Joe from You. I see memes about how, oh, I see why I think the way I do in My Toxic Choice of Men when I knew I liked Joe. Not the best guy, but his characteristics presented some things that were appealing to an extent. It's just a matter of how high and how severe.
Well, this is it. It's not black and white. It's not
Okay,
right or wrong.
yeah.
It's gray area, baby.
Yeah.
So everything is, there's no
Like-
very solid. So yeah, that's, and even the whole rule and exception, there's all, it's not one size fits all. It's really not. Where there is, that's it. There are some men who thrive and succeed because they're a man, because life is easy. Therefore, I'd be like, I would expect you.
Okay,
to have
I'm gonna
good
give you an
income.
example. My dad's the top half a percentage of earners. Okay, he's the white man, right? But here's the thing. He worked 80 hours a week my whole life. I didn't get to see him.
Yeah.
How is that like the patriarchy when my dad put in 80 hours every week his whole life?
Yeah,
like
yeah,
from the time I was like
Yeah.
a child, right? Missed a lot
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
shit. Like he earned that.
Yeah.
And I'm never gonna say that's like
No.
the patriarchy.
Well, the only way we can
But now
argue-
he's a white male CEO.
Yeah.
Right. So is that the patriarchy, or
Well-
did women not choose to do that?
Well, that's the only way we could argue. Is the only definitive answer
Yeah.
you could have is if you had a exact female replica to be like, she likely would not get where he is. That's the only way we could argue it.
Okay, so this is the last clip, and I put this in. It's not necessarily psychology per se, but it's about statistics. So I notice on these type of shows too, when arguments get refuted, I typically say they want to go with the general example when it benefits them, and they go with the extreme example when it doesn't. So here she uses the example of Pearl's father being an outlier. So if we want to see if it's really the patriarchy, the reason why he made it to that point, we need to get someone with the exact same abilities, credentials, but on the woman's side and see how it plays out. So when we talk about research and statistics, so this is coming down to how you set up your experimental design, right? So we talk about research, we're going to talk about something like reliability and validity. So what reliability is, it wants to show that these results of this study can be shown again and again and be consistent when they're shown. What validity tells me is how accurate is what we're trying to measure being shown. So for example, if we want to do a study on how high people can jump, the measures that we use need to show jumping ability, like a vert test. But we're not going to do a 40-yard dash. So it needs to make sense. So when it comes to her example using Pearl's dad, yeah, we can get the woman with the similar credentials, similar age, similar circumstances, and see how it plays out, that's going to be having a strong control and strong internal validity. With studies like this, we can probably have a greater sense that exactly what we were trying to find is found. But the problem is we're going to have a problem on the other side of the spectrum, which is external validity, which is how this is applied to the real world. Researchers spend a lot of time, even myself when I published my singular article, but we had to go over what are we trying to find. We spend time on planning this out. So it has to be a balance, and we have to know, is this going to find what we're going to see in the lab and has a lot of control so it makes sense of what we're trying to find, or we're going to find that this makes sense to the greater masses. So in this case, this study would have high internal validity, which means it'll show exactly what we want to see is, oh, is this woman with the same measures and traits going to be able to produce the same results as Pearl's dad? On the vice versa, we probably couldn't relegate this to the real world. I'm in the applied psychology field, so I'm a little more to the external side. We need both. Like, I've done research when it is limited like that and shows high internal and a lot of control on what's happening. And on the other side, I've done external so we can apply it to the real world. Now, the control things, you have to make sure your variables are within reach. There's some variables that you have zero control over, like something like size or age, but then you can control like how much you expose them to the stimulus or the different experimental interventions. So it's just a matter of what you're trying to find. And the beauty of research is you're usually going to find what you're looking for, but let's be ethical when we do our research. So guys, I appreciate you for tuning in. Thank you, Pearl, for this great episode. I watched the whole thing. Guys, go check out her channel, Just Pearly Things. She always has great topics, great guests. And I had fun reviewing it. And like I said, it's right up my alley. So I'm glad I stumbled across this to be able to make use of it on my channel and talk about the actual science and the psychology of these different aspects and making them to the real world. Hope you learned something too as well, because that's what this channel is for. And thank you for letting me break it down and get your mind right.